She was 7 years old, soaked to the bone, shoes worn through, hands trembling like a leaf in a storm, and she walked up to a scarred, silent stranger in a roadside diner, gripped his sleeve with ice-cold fingers, and whispered 6 words that would change both their lives forever. "Please, can you be my dad?" Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales, where every story is proof that the most important battles aren't fought on battlefields. Sometimes they're fought in quiet places, in rainy diners, in the trembling voice of a child who has no one left. The rain had been falling for 3 hours without mercy. Not the gentle kind that softens the world and sends children to sleep. This was the kind that hammers, the kind that turns Interstate 40 into a black mirror and buries headlights whole, the kind that makes the whole world feel very small and very, very alone. Inside the Blue Ridge Diner, a tired little roadside stop somewhere between nowhere and forgotten, the overhead lights hummed with that faint flicker nobody ever bothered to fix. The smell of burnt coffee and old wood filled the air like it had lived there for decades. Most booths sat empty. The highway outside was silent. In the far corner booth, back against the wall, eyes steady on the door, sat Jack Thompson. 50 years old, broad through the shoulders in the way that comes not from a gym, but from carrying weight for a very long time. His hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold. He hadn't moved to warm it. There were lines on his face that didn't come from age alone. They came from sand and heat and the particular silence that follows an explosion. They came from names he still carried, faces he couldn't put down no matter how many quiet nights he tried. He always chose the corner booth, always sat with his back to the wall. Old habits didn't leave after the service, they just learned to be still. At his feet lay Rex, a German shepherd, 7 years old, coat the color of autumn, eyes that missed nothing and forgave everything. Rex was not a pet in any ordinary sense of the word. He was the exhale after a nightmare, the warm weight across Jack's feet in the 3 a.m. darkness that said without a single sound, "You're still here. You made it through another one." In the years since Jack had come home from his last deployment, hollow in ways that don't appear on any medical scan, Rex had become the only living thing that made the silence feel survivable rather than suffocating. Jack stared at the rain on the glass. The way it always happened on nights like this, a memory surfaced. Not a full one, just a fragment. Sand. Radio static, a voice saying a name he still couldn't hear without feeling it deep in his chest. He pressed it back down the way he always did, firmly, gently, the way you close a door you know better than to leave open. He reached down without thinking and rested his hand on Rex's back. Rex leaned into it without opening his eyes. That small pressure, that faithful, wordless lean, it was enough. The bell above the diner door rang. Jack's eyes moved there instantly, not paranoia, but reflex carved so deep it lived in his bones now. The waitress behind the counter glanced up briefly. The only other customer, an older trucker with tired eyes and a half-eaten slice of pie, didn't bother. A little girl walked through the door. She was small, maybe 7, soaked completely through, dark hair plastered flat to her face, an oversized coat hanging off her thin shoulders like it belonged to someone else entirely. Her shoes, canvas sneakers, once pink, now the color of wet pavement, had a hole worn through the left toe. She stood just inside the entrance, and her eyes moved around the room with a speed and a calculation that no child her age should possess. She wasn't looking for warmth, she was looking for safety. Rex's ears rose slowly. His body, loose and resting a moment ago, became perfectly still in the particular way that meant he was reading something the room hadn't caught yet. Jack watched the girl's eyes move, past the trucker, past the waitress, past the empty booths, until they stopped. On him. Most children meeting the eyes of a man like Jack Thompson, quiet in the unsettling way of someone who has seen too much, would look away, would drift toward the counter, toward the waitress, toward anyone softer. She didn't look away. She took a breath that visibly shook her whole small chest, and she walked straight toward him. Jack stayed completely still and watched her cross the diner. Each step cost her something visible. He could see it in her jaw, in her shoulders, in the way her hands stayed curled at her sides, like she was holding herself together by sheer will alone. She reached his booth and stopped. Up close, he saw it clearly. Her eyes were dry. She had already spent every tear she had. What remained was something rawer than crying, the face of a child who had made a decision and was seeing it through because there was simply nothing else left to do. Her small hand reached out and gripped the sleeve of his jacket. Her fingers were ice cold. She looked up at him, and her voice came in a whisper so fragile it barely survived the distance between them. "Please, can you be my dad, just for a minute?" The rain kept falling. The lights kept flickering. The diner kept breathing its tired, quiet breath. But something inside Jack Thompson, something sealed shut for years, mortared over by grief and distance and the long habit of not letting things in, split open at the seam. Rex rose to his feet without a sound. He stepped forward and placed himself with quiet, absolute certainty between the girl and the door behind her. No command given, no signal needed, just the deep, ancient instinct of a loyal animal who understood the situation completely before any human in the room could name it. Jack looked at the girl for one long, still moment. "Sit down," he said, voice low, steady as river stone. She slid in beside him instantly, pressing close against his arm, the way a child presses against someone they have decided, in the deepest, most unthinking part of themselves, to trust with everything. She smelled of rain and cold air and fear, the particular scent of fear Jack knew from a lifetime of high-stakes darkness. He didn't ask questions yet. He just let her be close, and he watched the door. He didn't wait long. The bell rang again. The man who entered was clean, composed, the kind of composed that doesn't come from calm, but from long practice at appearing calm. His jacket was dry. He'd been waiting somewhere covered, watching, not searching. His eyes swept the diner in one smooth, professional motion, and when they found the corner booth, something shifted briefly in his expression before he locked it back down. Almost fast enough. Rex made a sound so low it was less a growl than a vibration, something felt in the chest more than heard by the ears. Under the table, the girl's fingers found Jack's forearm and held on with everything she had. The man approached with a smile placed carefully on his face. "I believe," he said pleasantly, "that you have my daughter." The girl shook her head against Jack's arm, silent, violent, certain. Jack leaned back, unhurried. He settled his arm around her shoulders with a naturalness that came from somewhere beyond thought, and looked at the man across the table with eyes that had faced worse things in darker places than a flickering diner on a rainy highway. "She's right where she belongs," he said quietly. The man's smile held. "You're making a mistake, friend." The word friend landed with a particular coldness. Jack held his gaze through a silence that stretched long and still. "No," he said, "you are." The man's eyes moved to Rex.
Rex didn't growl again. He simply stood, unmoving, unhurried, a wall of absolute commitment, and stared back with amber eyes that had never learned how to look away from something that needed watching. Jack leaned down toward the girl, his voice dropping to almost nothing. "Kid, do you know him?" Her answer came in a breath so fractured it barely held its shape. "He hurt my mom." And there it was. Not rage, not the cold rush of adrenaline, something quieter and more powerful than both. The absolute clarity of purpose, the thing that had driven Jack Thompson through 11 years of impossible situations in impossible places. The knowledge, clean and certain as a compass needle, of exactly what needed to be done. He stood up. At 6'3", broad and still, and carrying the particular gravity of a man who has nothing left to prove and everything left to protect, he became something the man across from him had not planned for. Not a threat, not a fight, just a wall, patient, immovable, certain. Rex stepped forward to stand beside him. The man held his position for 3 seconds. 2, 1. "I'll call the police," he said, a thin edge entering his voice for the first time. Jack nodded slowly. "Go ahead. I'll be right here, with my daughter." That word, daughter. It didn't just fill the booth, it filled the entire room. The trucker set his fork down. The waitress behind the counter went absolutely still. Even the rain outside seemed to pause for just a breath. The man looked at Jack one final time, then he turned and walked out into the storm. But through the rain-blurred window, Jack watched him stop beside his car, engine idling, waiting. Jack made one call. A man he had served beside for 11 years, someone who still picked up on the second ring regardless of the hour, regardless of the year, regardless of how much time had passed. Within the hour, 2 vehicles arrived quietly in the parking lot. The right authorities were contacted. The evidence Sarah's mother had hidden carefully before everything fell apart was exactly what it needed to be. The man in the parking lot did not win that night. He had simply chosen the wrong diner, the wrong booth, the wrong man. Her name was Sarah. She told Jack the rest in pieces over hot chocolate the waitress brought without being asked. Her mother had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. People with power doing things power was never meant to do. They had run. They hadn't run far enough. Her mother had pressed an address into her small hand, told her to find the highway and find someone who felt safe. "How did you know I was safe?" Jack asked quietly. Sarah looked down at Rex. "He did," she said simply. Jack looked at his dog for a long moment. Rex looked back at him with those amber eyes, steady, faithful, certain. And Jack felt something shift in his chest, something that had been locked in one position for years, moving almost imperceptibly toward something it hadn't faced in a long time. Peace. "You're not alone anymore," Jack said. Rex rested his head on Sarah's knee. She placed her small hand on his fur, and for the first time since the night began, she stopped shaking. Sunrise came softly. Pale gold light pressed through the diner windows and lay across the table in long, quiet strips. Sarah ate pancakes with the focused seriousness of a child who hadn't eaten since the day before. Rex lay at her feet, and every few minutes she reached down and rested her palm on his back, not petting him, just touching him, the way you touch something that is keeping you anchored to the world. Jack drank his coffee and watched her and didn't say much. He didn't need to. Days passed. The right people found her aunt, her mother's sister, 2 states away, who had been searching with a desperation that had stolen sleep and reason both. A safe home, a real beginning, the kind of ending that doesn't erase what happened, but builds something livable and warm on the other side of it. The morning Sarah left, she knelt down and wrapped both arms around Rex's neck and held on. Rex sat perfectly still. He rested his chin gently on her small shoulder and closed his eyes. And in that one gesture, in that quiet and complete surrender to the moment, he gave her everything a loyal creature can give. Full presence, full warmth, no holding back. Sarah's shoulders shook once. Then she steadied herself, pulled back, and looked at Rex's face for a long moment, like she was memorizing it. Then she stood and turned to Jack. She wrapped her arms around him and held on longer than before, longer than a goodbye, longer than a thank you, longer than anything that had a simple name. Jack held her carefully, the way you hold something you know isn't yours to keep, but are profoundly, permanently grateful to have protected. She pulled back and looked up at him. "You don't have to pretend anymore," she whispered. "You were already my dad." Jack's throat sealed completely shut. He nodded, once, slowly. Then he turned toward his truck before she could see his face. He drove 3 miles. Then he pulled onto the gravel shoulder and stopped. Sat in the silence with the engine ticking and the morning light coming pale through the windshield. Rex pressed close beside him in the front seat, closer than usual, heavier than usual, and Jack buried one hand in the warm fur of his neck and sat there for a long time without moving. Not fighting it, just feeling it, all of it, the weight of those 6 words, the cold fingers on his sleeve, the way she had stopped shaking when Rex rested his head on her knee. The word daughter hanging in that flickering diner like something holy. Rex didn't shift, didn't whine, didn't try to fix it. He simply stayed, as he always had, as he always would. That was enough. Years moved the way they do, quietly, steadily, carrying everything forward. Jack was sitting on his porch outside Asheville on a warm September evening when the letter arrived. Rex lay beside the chair, gray at the muzzle now, legs moving slower, eyes still sharp but softer around the edges. He had earned his rest, and he wore it with dignity. Jack opened the envelope. The handwriting was grown, steady, but if you looked closely, if you had seen those same hands once trembling on the sleeve of a jacket in a rainy diner, you would recognize something in it, a determination, a grip. "Dear Jack, I graduate next month, top of my class. I'm going to law school in the fall. I want to protect children who have no one to stand up for them, the way you stood up for me. I still remember the sound of the rain that night. I still remember Rex's fur under my hand and how it made me stop shaking. I still remember the word you used, daughter. I carry it every single day like something precious. You showed me that one person standing up at the right moment can change everything. I'm going to spend my life doing the same. Thank you for being real when nothing else was. Sarah." Jack read it once. Then he read it again. Then he folded it carefully along its original crease and held it flat against his chest and looked out at the trees going gold in the evening light, at the sky going rose and amber at the edges, at the world sitting quiet and full and unhurried all around him. Rex shifted beside him and laid his gray muzzle on Jack's knee. Jack rested his hand there, felt the warmth, the familiar weight, the faithful presence that had walked every mile of this road beside him, without complaint, without condition, without ever once letting go. "We did good, buddy," he said softly. Rex exhaled a long, slow breath. and closed his eyes. The evening wrapped around them both like something gentle and permanent, like grace, like the particular quiet that only comes when a man has finally, fully set down the weight he was never supposed to carry alone. Some heroes are decorated in ceremonies, their names carved into stone, their courage measured in medals and citations, and crowds standing to attention. And some sit alone in corner booths of empty diners on rainy highways, carrying invisible weight, waiting for nothing in particular, until someone needs everything. And in that moment, without calculation, without hesitation, without counting what it might cost, they simply stand up. That is the truest courage, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that rises quietly when it is needed, plants itself like a tree and refuses to move. If that kind of courage still matters to you, if you believe that loyalty and kindness can still change the course of a life, then you belong here, with us, at Jack and Rex Tales. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this story with someone tonight who needs to be reminded that real heroes still exist, that they're quieter than you'd expect, and that sometimes they find you in the last place you'd ever think to look. This story carries something important beneath its emotion. It reflects the real and often invisible struggle of combat veterans returning home, the hypervigilance, the isolation, the weight of names and faces that never fully leave. It shows how purpose and healing can arrive not through time alone, but through being genuinely needed by someone else. It illustrates the documented, life-changing bond between veterans and their dogs, the way a loyal animal can provide what words and medicine sometimes cannot. It shows a child's courage in an impossible situation and the community instinct to protect the vulnerable without waiting for permission. And it carries the quiet truth that one act of courage, one person simply standing up, can ripple outward for decades, shaping lives and futures in ways the person who stood up may never fully know. That is the heart of this story, and it is worth remembering.